saving the redwoods, breaking barriers to protect the ancient trees. The redwoods, gigantic, majestic, skyscraping trees. Their beauty is what began the battle of redwood life, or lumber. The wood so valuable due to its size, durability, rot resistance, burn resistance, and its stunning, rich, red colored. But these trees tell history with an age of over 2,000 years and stand to be well over 300 feet tall. The tallest trees in the world, which, from the beginning, led many to believe we should at least protect some of these beautiful, ancient, enormous trees. The fiercest of these debates to protect old-growth redwoods rather than using them all as lumber came in the 1980s and 90s. Redwood environmental activists stood up to protect old-growth redwoods in the Headwaters Forest as well as other areas of forest, and broke barriers by changing how people perceived redwood forest treatment and timber industry's practices towards a more sustainable mentality. They protested for legislation, despite public harassment and jailing, to make areas of old-growth forests into parks so future generations could enjoy these parks, and the redwood forest ecosystem could also benefit by having healthy old-growth redwoods to support its unique flora and fauna. But first, how did it come to this? Let me show you. English settlers came for gold in the 1850s during the California Gold Rush. When miners first came, they did not want to deal with logging the enormous redwood, as they did not have the tools to deal with a tree of that size. When loggers first started logging redwood trees on the Pacific Northwest in the mid-1800s, it was not unusual for two men to spend as much as a week of steady chopping to bring down one of these giants, for they were armed with little more than an axe, logging the redwoods. But technology quickly improved, leading to the building of hundreds of mills. Soon, redwood lumber was shipped on trains and ships to many cities in California for infrastructure, but eventually spread out of the state's borders. Coastal Northern California's economy was figuratively and literally built by redwoods. Logging technology greatly improved in the next century. Therefore, logging increased. In the early mid-1900s, some legislation to protect redwoods was passed, and some state and national parks were developed, but they did not protect the vast majority of the old-growth redwood population. As the 20th century progressed, lumber demand continued to increase. By the 80s, there was only around 5% of the remaining old-growth forest. Beginning in the mid-80s, the company that was responsible for the most logging was Pacific Lumber, once a family-run business who sustainably logged. In 1986 was taken over by a billionaire, Charles Hurwitz, who at the time owned Maxim Inc., an investment firm. Charles Hurwitz bought an immense amount of stock from Pacific Lumber until he controlled interest of the company. The company began cutting double to triple the amount of trees being cut before the takeover. The new ownership gave birth to the first large group of environmentalists willing to fight hard and break the barrier of people's logging mindset in order to get protection for redwood forests. Some of Pacific Lumber's loggers and families also thought the rate of logging was overly excessive. As a newspaper explains this, the acquisition of Pacific Lumber to the hands of Maxim Inc., after a bitter takeover fight, gave birth to an uneasy alliance of environmental groups, loggers, and residents of Scotia, Pacific's company town in Humboldt County. They feared rapid depletion of ancient redwoods would eliminate the area's economic base, which is dependent on milling them. Desert Sun newspaper, May 28, 1988. As the logs, 15 feet in diameter, continued to fall, environmentalists in an organization called Earth First organized a 3-month campout in the summer of 1990 to raise awareness of how the logging in Humboldt County and throughout the Redwood region, especially the logging done by Pacific Lumber, was destroying the entire redwood ecosystem. They gave speeches about why the ancient trees are so important to preserve and how the rate Pacific Lumber was cutting the trees and their clear-cutting methods was very unhealthy for the forest and would also make for scarce lumber in the future. Aside from give speeches, Earth First members also sang songs and played music at Redwood Summer. The events throughout the next decade all contributed to the gain of attention from the rest of the state and nation to the issue of lack of legislation to protect primarily old-growth redwoods. Events such as arrests and police pepper spraying during sit-ins, arrests of protesters when they entered private Pacific Lumber-owned land to chain themselves to trees, other civil disobedience included barricading logging trucks and tree sits such as Julia Butterfly's famous 2-year tree sit and many others. Julia Butterfly said she felt like a piece of her soul was being ripped out every time one of these incredible trees was ripped from the flesh of the earth. Loggers were rightfully angry at environmentalists who were getting in the way of them doing their job, the only job most loggers knew how to do. The environmentalists were like a new piece in the game, and the loggers didn't want to have to deal with them, for their civil disobedience made loggers' profits and jobs at risk. Over 10% of working people in 11 counties in the Redwoods range had a job in the timber industry at the time. In some counties, up to 40% of workers had jobs in timber. Although conflicts were generally nonviolent, in 1990, Judy Berry, a Redwood environmental activist, had her pelvis shattered when a bomb went off in her car. She was accused of transporting the bomb, but it was later believed she was bombed by someone purposefully. Later, in 1998, an angry logger fell a tree on David Chain, killing him. On the side of legislation, bills were put on ballots to help mitigate the rate of cut and make redwood parks and reserves. This wasn't just to protect the trees themselves, but also the endangered, unique animals who called the redwood forest home. Marble murrelets, coho salmon, and northern spotted owls, among others. Although some parks were formed, most of the initiatives were defeated, in part due to the timber industry pushing back and lumberjacks supporting them, mainly for fear of losing their jobs. In the later 1990s, focus shifted toward protection for Headwaters Grove, a section of Redwoods Forest southeast of Eureka, privately owned by Pacific Lumber, which contained more old-growth redwoods than any other area Pacific Lumber owned, almost 60,000 acres. The Environmental Protection Information Center, EPIC, based in Humboldt County, filed lawsuits against Pacific Lumber, and Earth First protesters continued to perform acts of civil disobedience against the company. Eventually, in March 1998, after many tries from all sides of the issue to strike a deal for at least some protection of the grove, Headwaters Forest Reserve was established and was placed under the Bureau of Land Management. The protection of old-growth redwood forests, including the Headwaters Forest, is significant because the protection of these trees ensures a healthy redwood forest ecosystem. This benefits the forest's unique plant and animal life who depend on the giants, as well as humans who can use redwood parks for recreation and enjoyment, and be thankful that redwood environmentalists stood up for these trees because they store more carbon from the atmosphere than any other forest.